episode of the Firehouse Chronicles. This is a living history of a lifetime spent serving others as seen through the eyes of our veteran firefighters. Today we are featuring not only a veteran firefighter, but also a World War II veteran, and Mr. Paul Dudley from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
That's correct.
Thank you for being here today. We appreciate your time. You made the trip and came down to visit with us a little about your history, which, as I learned at lunch, was quite extensive.
Yeah.
Been down the road.
Well, I'm enjoying. I'm going to enjoy this.
Well, good. Hopefully, this will be a little piece of history we can capture, and then 50 years from now, it's still there.
I know there's been an awfully lot of changes in the fire service since my first employment.
We talked about that a little earlier, and so tell me again, Paul. You served the fire service in Tulsa the entire time.
Yes.
From when to when?
From January the 1st, 1946, until June the 28th of 1985.
39 and a half years, if my math is right.
Right.
It's a pretty amazing career. So you talked a little bit earlier about some of the things that we've seen change-wise. Of course, now there's a lot of technology, and hopefully the job's a little safer, maybe.
Yeah. Well, it is. With the advent of a self-contained breathing apparatus, makes quite a difference on your own physical as you get a little bit older. A lot of the firefighters were dropping out when they were about 65 or 70 from heart problems or lung problems or respiratory problems. So that was a big change. And the equipment is much better. And even the new hose was Dacron, and it used to be old double jacket linen, and it had to be washed and scrubbed and hung and dried, and so
we talked about that earlier about the cotton hose. And tell us kind of when you get through with the run, you had a job to do with that cotton hose.
Well, yes, you did, of course. In really bad weather, or if it's muddy or whatever, you have to roll it up. And cold weather, that roll would be pretty big, and especially if it had any dirt on it or whatever. But you had to get that loaded back on your truck, just rolled up. And you weren't ready to go to another fire until you went back to the station and unrolled that hose, washed it down, and then you would have to hang it. You would hang it in the hose tower. And you folded it over and it was picked up. So a 50-foot section of hose, it became 25 feet. But you had to give clearance at the bottom and at the top. So the hose tower was usually about 35 to 40 foot. And you had to hang that. And of course, in Tulsa, each company had enough for 2 loads of hose. Dry. And you'd load on the hose. Whatever you used out of your hose bed, you filled it up with dry hose. If you unloaded the whole load, then you had to take all of the dry load that you had in reserve and put it on. And it was no really big ordeal, but it's something that you had to be concerned about with the double jacket linen, because you put it in the hose bed and it was wet. Unless you got it off there pretty quick, it was going to start mildewing.
Which further degrades it, then it won't handle the job. And I'm sure it was a lot heavier wet, obviously.
Oh, it was wet.
Twice as heavy probably when you get it.
2.5-inch hose was wet, something, but if you had 3-inch hose, it was pretty damn heavy.
I bet so.
Pardon the French. But
no, that's all right. It is what it is. It's just heavy. But so a lot of times, and we were talking, we went to lunch earlier, you and I and Dick Cagle, and we're talking about the hose towers that used to be in the old fire stations.
Yes.
Which there's no need for that now, obviously, with the modern hose. But
modern hose is not
that
necessary.
Tower, I always never really understood what that tower was, being not from that world. But so there's a purpose for those And it was
Oh,
dry
yeah,
hose.
you had to dry the hose.
So technologically, we've advanced in trucks, we've advanced in all
Oh,
kinds
yes,
of safety
trucks.
equipment.
The truck I went to work on was, my first truck was an Aaron's Fox, positive displacement, and carrying 3-inch hose. And we laid out considerably because we only had in that truck, there was only 50 gallons of water tank. So if you were going to use an 1.5-inch line, you had to first lay out a hose line off the hydrant.
And I was gonna ask you that too, in the 40s, would there have been water or fire hydrants as we know them today, or was that?
Oh, we had, the fire hydrants were there. A lot of the, in Tulsa, for instance, there were some of the area, when they had 4-inch water distribution lines, and they've all been upgraded.
Hard to move enough water. in a
So
4-inch line.
you won't find one any smaller than 6 hardly in any municipality. You know, 6 to 8.
My thought was 50 gallons, you barely get your hose full. I mean, that's just,
Oh yeah, you use that. Well, that was only for nuisance fires like your red line or your booster line, small 1-inch line, and it'd take care of very minor fire, car fire or something like that. But if you had anything that required more water, you're gonna have to lay a hose.
yeah.
So there was a lot of hose laid. That because today modern trucks, I mean, they carry anywhere from 500 to 1,000 gallons of water.
As long as you could land somewhere near some water or fire hydrant, you're okay. Otherwise, you just kind of
Yeah, and
didn't waste any.
you can put out quite a little fire with 1,000 gallons of water. Certain conditions. Sometimes you need a whole lot more than that. So.
Well, it's interesting when you kind of look at the difference, and you talked about the truck, the earlier truck. I think we have one of those in this museum.
Yeah,
You looked at it a little earlier today.
I saw it a while ago, and
Yeah.
so most trucks from that vintage were open cab, no hydraulic brakes, usually mechanical brakes, and if you're running in wet weather and they get a little bit wet, you didn't have a whole lot of brake to talk about it. So,
Plan your route.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and you just had to kind of look around because you didn't have a good windshield wiper. You had windshield in front of you, just more like a bug screen. But, so it's a lot different.
What would those old trucks run, mile per hour wise?
Well, some of them pretty rapid. And they had good, big, heavy engines. They were bigger. They were long stroke engines. All kinds of torque. So, but of course maybe they wouldn't have the horsepower of the engines today, but they had an awful lot of torque.
Like an old 6-cylinder pickup used to be in my day. A 6-cylinder pickup, it might not run a hole in the wind, but you sure
You had
had a
more
lot of
torque.
low end.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we talked a little earlier too, and another thing I thought was kind of keyed on as we visited through lunch was you were instrumental in Tulsa in starting what they call, what's known as the third shift.
Yes.
Tell us about that. So
Well,
originally, what was the setup as far as hours?
Well, when I went to work, the city of Tulsa was operating 84 hours, 24 on and 24 off, and that would be 84 hours a week. But when I went to work, they were beginning to work a 72-hour shift, 72 hours a week. But that lasted from 46 until 1950. Now, with that system, about every 2 weeks you would get a shift off.
A shift,
A shift,
24 hours, an extra 24 hours.
an extra 24 hours. And then about every 3 months you get 2 shifts in a row. Well, that worked out to make the 72-hour week. And then they put in the third shift, going from 72 hours to 56 hours in 1950. And they put on that third shift, and they had, most of us firemen, had presumed that we'd be working 24 on and 48 off. But that was not the way it turned out. So for a number of years, we worked what they called a 10-14. We would work a 10-hour day shift from 8 to 6. New shift come on, and we'd be off from 6 o'clock in the evening till 6 o'clock the next evening. That'd give us 24 hours off. We'd come to work at 6 o'clock, get off at 8 o'clock the next morning. Again, we'd be off 24 hours. And the next shift, we'd work that 8, 6, get off, and another 24 hours. So it's 10, 14, 10, 14. 10-hour day, 14-hour night. So you met yourself coming and going.
Say, it's about like a salt mine, it sounds like.
Yeah. Well, I guess some of the older heads thought you shouldn't be away from the firehouse more than about 24 hours. So,
Might forget what you learned.
yeah, that's something. Yeah.
Well, that's, so was there any unions back then? Is that?
Oh, yeah.
They had the Firefighters Union.
There
Weren't
weren't, by law, there were not any, recognized
thing like there is today, like guaranteeing your bargaining rights. Then you had a committee, usually you say, well, the bargaining committee, and even though there was union, the city didn't necessarily recognize the union. But they'd go down with the city fathers and try to negotiate. And it depended who's in office. Sometimes they had an ear, sometimes they didn't.
Probably that third shift required some of you guys advocating.
Well, when we were going for the 56 hours, we had a petition, and because myself and other firefighters, we carried a petition door to door. And we had the people, citizens of Tulsa,
sign that petition.
and we would explain to them what we were attempting to do. And most they sided with us that was just too many hours in a week. So that petition, the mayor at the time, and I won't mention his name, he felt like firemen ought to work every day.
Sounds like you almost were.
Just about. So that petition was kicked out. So we ran it again. We did the same thing. And the next time we had more signatures than they did the first time. I'd go knock on the door. You were in uniform. They said, let me have that. You didn't have to explain it to them. They put their name on there, and we had an overwhelming amount of signatures. So I went to the public. They voted us in. to go to 56 hours. And of course that required hiring a pretty good substantial number
So
of men.
it sounds like it would take a lot of people, a lot of men.
Yeah.
In those days to fill those slots to make enough to.
So we had to very hurriedly, the city of Tulsa, the fire department had, with their instructors, hurry some of these people through a date that they wanted to become effective. So it took 30 days, 6 weeks or whatever to get these guys up to steam a little bit where they could go on a fire company. And so we had the third shift.
Sounds like it was needed.
It was
You
needed.
guys were working a lot of hours.
We put in a lot of hours, and back then the wages were not very good. And
So just for reference, and again, I wasn't born until 61, so it's kind of hard for me to think back. What would average wage in the 50s say for a firefighter?
when I went to work on the fire department, because I was probation, and that probationary period lasted about a year. And my beginning salary was $179.30 a month. So shortly after that, they got a raise, and they raised it to $200. But of course, I know that was back when a dollar bill would purchase probably as much as a $10 bill today.
Oh, I'm sure some relative.
More, yeah, relative.
That would be, but it's still not much money. And
No.
it sounds like you were working, and you worked by the hour, right? I mean, it wasn't a salary thing.
That was a salary. You didn't have an hourly wage.
Okay, but it was just you had to put in a certain amount of hours for it.
Yeah. And there was no such thing as overtime, no time and a half. So if you were on call, if you were off, you were still on call, especially the off-going shift with 3. The off-going shift, alarm firefighter or fire someplace, you would call some people in, and they would man reserve equipment at any particular fire station, and there's no extra pay for that.
Just an expectation that you're there.
It's an expectation that you were on call 24 hours a day.
Yeah, I'd say we've come a long way.
Yep, there was no such thing as time and a half.
And I think today, if you put, not to discredit the youth of today, but if you threw that scenario, that hours or whatever, that you had to be there, you'd have a hard time getting firemen now.
Yeah,
I mean, and probably rightfully so. I mean, that was extraordinarily tough, it sounds like, but it was just kind of the world you lived in.
right, and the wages didn't begin to come up until in the 60s, the late 60s, 70s, and they had ruled out, we went off of the silver standard. The government started printing money, so it took more money to do this and that. And your wages began to come up to offset that. So they went off the silver standard in 1964, and I was promoted to district fire chief in 1964. And my wage at that time was $600 a month. But things began to happen. Under the Carter administration, if you remember, inflation really hit big. And the wages kept coming up. And they're still up today. When we look at this last inflation.
Well, the dollar just doesn't go as far. I mean, you have to pay, you gotta be able to eat.
Well, yeah,
and
you
so
have to eat.
can't
You have to
expect-
raise a family.
Yeah.
And the first day when I went to work, I mean, when I didn't have any children, my daughter was born in '48. But I was working 24 hours and 24 off, and I was spending more time at the firehouse than I did at home.
Kind of hard to have a balance in your life.
Yeah.
So much, yeah.
So,
So you had a pretty storied career as a firefighter. I mean, you, again, from 1946 to 1985, 39.5 years. That's quite a career, even, today's standards. I guess a lot of guys go 30, but, they may not
Yeah.
be much over that, but, it's pretty long. But you didn't start out as a firefighter, I don't guess. You were in World War II, correct?
I was in World War II. I was discharged from the Army. I was in the Army Air Corps. And I was discharged on December the 4th of 1945. And I enlisted in the spring of 1942. And I got discharged on December 4 from Riverside Airport in California, Marchfield.
Yeah.
And I came home, I didn't know where I was going to look for work.
And you're from Tulsa originally?
I was from Tulsa.
Okay.
I had worked going into the service. Before that, I was working at Mid-Continent Refinery, and
Okay.
a very dirty job as a new rookie. And I didn't want to go back there.
Right.
So I didn't know where I was going to go to work. And my wife had worked at the Douglas air factory in Tulsa during the war. And a woman that she worked with, her husband was a captain on the fire department. And I'd met him, and I posed the same question. I just didn't really know where I was going to go to work or try, because all those defense jobs were gone.
Well,
An awfully lot of unemployment, veterans coming back. So he said, well, why don't you put in your application, fire department, they're going to be hiring some people. And they were only going to hire 20, and they would only look at veterans for applicants.
Okay.
So I went down, and the fire chief at that time was Chief Chester Jennings. And I put in my application, and I asked him at that time, I said, well, what do you think of my chances of going to work? Well, about as good as anybody else's. So a few days later, now remember, I'd only discharged from the service on the 4th. And this is still in the month of December. And he called me in a few days and he said, are you still interested in going to work? I said, yes, sir. So I was directed to the old Medical Arts building in Tulsa and to take a physical. And the results of that, he called me and told me that I would be going to fire station. I was assigned to fire station number 3, but he said, you're not going to go there the first day. You're going to station 7, 6th and Lewis. So my first shift on the fire department was at number 7 fire station. And that was on the 1st, so I had been out of the service less than a month.
Right. So did you, in your World War II experience, where all did you see? Did you go ship out overseas, I'm assuming?
Well,
Or how did that look?
when I enlisted, I first went to Fort Sill.
Okay.
And I started basic there, but then because I had enlisted for the Army Air Corps, I was soon shipped down to Wichita Falls, Texas, Shepherd Field.
Know exactly where it is, yes, sir.
And I went to the aviation mechanic school there.
Okay.
And from there, I was put on a troop train and shipped to Santa Monica, California, and spent went to another school, Douglas Aircraft Factory, went to their factory school. And I left there in January, and I was shipped to Salt Lake Kearns Field in Salt Lake City. And I was there and awaiting shipment, we thought, to the Pacific. But then there was, at that time, a new group of personnel that were going to Greenland and open up an air base there on the southern part of Greenland. And this would be a stopover for aircraft bombers, 2-engine jobs or 4-engine, going to Scotland or England.
Yes.
And so, but before they could establish that base, those men were being transported to Greenland by a boat.
No landing strip there yet, was there?
Well, they had a landing strip, but
Okay,
they were sending enough to really man that air base.
gotcha.
And the boat they were on was sank, a torpedo. And the USS Dorchester.
Wow.
And they put out a commemorative stamp on that, the 4 chaplains who gave up their life jackets to other people and went down with the boat.
Wow.
There were 2 Protestants, a rabbi and a Catholic priest. And but anyway, they come back to Salt Lake City looking for replacements for those men, and I was one of them. So I was transported to Maine, Holton, Maine, and moved on up to Presque Isle, Maine, and moved on over by air to Greenland.
I bet Greenland was a little bit of a culture shock for a Tulsa boy, wasn't it?
I wondered what in the hell is this Oklahoma boy doing up here?
Yeah, never even heard of this place probably. That's
So-
interesting.
I spent 2 winters there, and the winters were very tough.
I was gonna say, I'm just thinking Greenland, little I know about it, I can't imagine it being pleasant.
So, but in the summers, you had 24 hours of daylight for a period of about 30 days, and gradually get a little darker, just like it does here in the winter, spring, fall and spring. And we would get a group of planes coming in, maybe 50 would be flying in, and some would have maybe a little problem. Others, you just, whatever, they lay over, you put a little cap off the fuel. And I had begun work as an aircraft electrician, and most of the problems, if they had any, were electrical problems. Mostly it had to do with voltage regulators and stuff like that, so minor stuff.
Right. Which could be a major thing in the air.
Yeah, it could be.
Probably need them to work.
Well, if your voltage regulator wasn't working right, you could overcharge the battery and blow it up or something. It could cause a fire.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's kind of a bad place to have a fire.
So you had to balance out those all regulators, that is a 4-engine or a 2-engine. You had 2 regulators. So, yeah,
So
It was-
tell me again, how old would you have been when you enlisted in the military?
I was 18.
18, so yeah.
I spent my 19th, 20th, 21st, and 22nd birthdays in the service.
Now, how were you raised in a fire, maybe, I didn't catch earlier, were your parents or your dad involved?
No, my father was an auditor for Gulf Oil Company.
Okay. So kind of
Yeah.
unrelated
Yeah,
upbringing.
unrelated
Yeah.
whatsoever. And so but since then, my family has been pretty much service related for the public. My son went to work on the fire department, but he only worked about 6 years, and he lost his leg in an off-duty accident. And my granddaughter is a Tulsa police officer.
Okay.
And my grandson is a line chief for the fighter squadron at Tulsa Municipal Airport. He's a master sergeant.
I see.
So, yeah. And my daughter married a friend of mine who was a district chief on the Tulsa Fire Department. So, pretty well, the whole family.
Quite a bit of public service
Yeah,
in that.
quite a bit of
layout.
public service in all of them, yes.
Well, Paul, I really appreciate you coming and visiting with us because, again, this program we're working on, this chronicling of history, you've seen stuff that, I mean, there's very few people alive that have seen some of the things you've seen just due to your age. I mean, 96 years old is no.
96, I'm 99.
You're 99?
I'll be 99 on the 9th of October.
Wow, Dick told me he thought 96, and I said, well, I'm gonna have to scold him, aren't I? Wow, so you'll be 100 years old before too long, won't you?
If the good Lord allows
Good
me.
Lord allows you. Well, so far it doesn't look like he's ready for you yet, so that's good.
Well, I try to stay ready for him.
Well, that's a pretty important piece of it too.
Yep.
What do you attribute, as a firefighter, especially a career firefighter, you probably ingested fumes, dangerous things. What do you attribute your age to? Do you think it's just your genetics, or have you
Well,
tried to do anything special?
I've got to start with
My home life, my mother was a very good
cook, and she
prepared a balanced diet every day.
Yeah,
And I never developed a cigarette habit.
probably a big deal.
And my mother would always say, now you brush your teeth. Good health starts with your mouth. So I was raised when your personal health and hygiene was pretty important. And I thank the good Lord that I never had a cigarette habit. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't smoke a cigar once in a while, or have a good martini once in a
I
while,
understand.
but I've tried to watch my health.
Yeah.
I've exercised and done the things that I should have done.
Sure. And you still drive a little bit, I understand.
I drive,
Yeah, that's good.
and I'm not, I couldn't get a distance walk, let alone a distance run.
Yeah.
So I depend on that stick.
Yeah, you bet. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today and visiting with you about your history. And of course, we aim at the fire service history, but the veteran history is also very interesting because it's a little of who you are. It's kind of, it's part of your story, and that's what we're interested in, is your story. So, first of all, thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you.
And thank you for spending your life, your adult life in public service and the public safety sector. That's very much appreciated. And to know that there's still some of you guys out there that still know how to run those older trucks. It's it's nice to know, because sometimes when these guys at the museum are putting one back together, they may have to call you. See if you can tell them.
Well, some of it I might could help, but
Probably.
yeah. So
Yeah. Well, we appreciate you very much coming up today, and thanks to your friend Dick Cagle for bringing you. I think that's an awesome opportunity to capture a little of that history.
well,
So,
Dick has always been
yeah,
very concerned about retired firefighters.
he has. Yep. We're
So,
going to actually have an interview
I
scheduled with
appreciate
him.
his effort in that.
Yes, sir. Well, thanks again, and folks, thanks for joining us on this episode of the Firehouse Chronicles. I'm Don Arms with the Oklahoma State Firefighter Association. We're filming here, as we do almost every time, at the beautiful Firefighter Museum, which we're extremely proud of. It's a great walk through fire service history and some of the equipment and things that are here. We'd love for you to come see. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you next time.